What happens when one careless joke shatters a marriage? That's what I discovered the night I whispered a thought I never expected to matter. He didn't yell, didn't argue. He simply walked out, leaving me alone with my own arrogance and the consequences I hadn't imagined. I'm Mirabel St. Clair, 29, and I used to think a little teasing was harmless. I never imagined one careless whisper could unravel everything I had built with Ethan. We'd been together for 6 years, planning a life together, engaged, and almost ready for marriage. He was calm, steady, principled, the kind of man everyone said I was lucky to have. And I believed it. I told myself I loved him. But sometimes, I thought, love didn't have to mean obedience, didn't have to mean restraint. It started innocently, a joke, a playful nudge, a thought I whispered during a quiet evening at home. I had been thinking about Oliver, Ethan's friend, and for reasons I can't fully explain, the words slipped out. Your friend could satisfy me better. I didn't intend it to matter, didn't expect him to take it seriously, didn't expect the silence that followed to feel like a chasm opening beneath me. Ethan didn't yell, he didn't argue, he didn't even raise his voice. He simply stopped, looked at me, and left the room. I laughed nervously at first, telling myself it was a joke, that he was overreacting, that he'd come back. But hours passed. He didn't return. He didn't call. He didn't send a single message. The house felt impossibly large, impossibly quiet, and I realized, too late, that my words had consequences I hadn't even considered. That night, I lay awake on the side of the bed I thought was mine. I tried to convince myself I had control, that I could smooth things over, that my charm, my humor, my explanations could fix this. But Ethan's silence spoke louder than any argument could. I felt exposed, powerless, and for the first time in years, unsure if the man I had loved would ever forgive me, or if I had ruined everything beyond repair. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. The evening started like any other, or at least that's what I told myself. Ethan was working late at the office, the kind of late that made his absence feel safe, predictable. I had planned a quiet night at home, with a glass of wine, some music, maybe a little teasing to feel playful again. Clara had called earlier, warning me not to push too far, not to let my jokes cross lines that weren't meant to be crossed. I laughed it off, telling her I was careful, that Ethan could take a joke. But inside, a small thrill of rebellion coursed through me, and I didn't resist it. The kids were at their grandparents' house for the weekend, so the apartment was quiet, empty, and intimate. I walked around in my soft slippers, imagining how different life would feel if I could speak freely, say exactly what I thought without consequences. I poured another glass of wine and checked my phone. A message from Oliver, Ethan's friend, popped up. Hope you're enjoying the quiet tonight. I smirked and typed back something playful, keeping it light, harmless, or so I told myself. When Ethan finally walked in, he didn't notice my little game at first. He smiled, asked about my day, set down his bag. I felt that familiar rush of affection, the kind that makes you want to lean into someone, but I didn't. I wanted to feel the thrill of daring, of saying something dangerous and watching the effect. That's when the words escaped me, almost without thought, whispered, "Your friend could satisfy me better." For a moment, the apartment was still. I thought I heard the clink of his keys on the counter, but maybe it was my own heartbeat. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He just looked at me, his expression unreadable, calm, and so utterly controlled that I felt a spike of fear. My stomach flipped, and I laughed nervously, telling myself it was a joke. "It's just a joke," I whispered to myself, trying to reclaim the moment. He didn't laugh. He didn't smile. He didn't even blink rapidly. He simply stood, as if considering something serious, and then walked out without a word. I froze, staring at the doorway where he had disappeared, expecting him to return, expecting an explanation, a laugh, anything. But the apartment remained silent, heavy, like the air itself had been rearranged to hold the tension. I tried to convince myself I was overreacting, that he would come back in a minute, that his quiet was just a temporary pause. I walked to the living room, sat on the couch, and tried to distract myself. I turned on music, poured another glass of wine, told myself it was harmless, playful, even necessary. My parents had always told me a little teasing keeps a relationship alive. Clara had said the same. But the more I tried to rationalize it, the more the silence weighed down on me. I realized that the joke had a weight I hadn't accounted for, and the calmness of his reaction, more than any yelling ever could, made me feel small. Hours passed. I checked my phone constantly, half expecting a text, a call, an apology even. Nothing. I told myself he was just upset, that it would blow over, that I had nothing to fear. But every time I heard the faint hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the clock, or even my own footsteps on the hardwood floor, it felt like a reminder that the moment I had treated as playful had changed something fundamental between us. Later, I tried to laugh it off when I called Clara. "He'll be fine," I said, forcing my voice light and casual. She didn't sound convinced. "Mira, he's serious. You went too far this time. Just be careful." I promised her I was fine, hiding the pit in my stomach. That night, lying in bed alone on my side of the mattress, I stared at the ceiling and tried to imagine how to recover, how to make him see that it was only a joke, that my words had no real meaning. I whispered to myself, again and again, that I was clever, that I could fix it, that he would come back and we would laugh about it. But deep down, I knew he had already started counting the cost, already assessing the consequences of my carelessness. By the time I finally drifted off, the weight of that single whispered sentence had settled into the apartment, into the silence, into the spaces where trust and intimacy used to live. And I had no idea just how far it would travel, how permanently it would alter the life we had built together. The morning after felt strange, heavy with tension I couldn't name. Ethan didn't come home until later than usual, and when he didn't greet me with a smile or a casual remark. He simply dropped his bag, nodded in my direction, and moved to check the mail. I tried to act normal, making breakfast, pouring coffee, and chatting about mundane things like the weather and errands. Every word I spoke felt hollow, and I could tell he noticed. His silence was sharper than any anger, and it made me realize that the whispered comment I thought was playful had consequences I hadn't imagined. At work, I tried to immerse myself in my projects, decorating proposals, client calls, and meetings with contractors. Clara texted, asking if Ethan had said anything since the night before. I lied easily, told her he was busy at work, that everything was fine. But my hands shook as I typed. The office, normally a place of calm and control, felt suffocating. I replayed the moment over and over in my head, wondering why he had walked out without a word, why he hadn't yelled, why his silence was so heavy. By lunchtime, I had convinced myself it was just shock, that he needed a little time to process my joke. I called Clara and tried to sound casual, laughing at the absurdity of what I had said. She didn't laugh with me, only warned me to be careful, that Ethan might be documenting everything, observing silently as he always did. I waved her concern aside, telling myself she was overreacting. I told myself I was clever, that I could manipulate the situation back in my favor. But the pit in my stomach told a different story. When I arrived home that evening, Ethan was in the kitchen, quietly preparing dinner. He didn't glance at me initially, didn't ask how my day went. I tried to break the ice, mentioning a small incident at work, a joke with a client. He nodded once, then continued chopping vegetables. I felt a spike of panic. He was calm, meticulous, completely in control. I asked if he was upset, trying to sound playful. He didn't answer immediately, only looking up for a moment with an expression I couldn't read. Then he said quietly, "We'll talk after the kids are in bed." The rest of the evening passed in a blur. I set the table, poured water, served food, and tried to maintain a sense of normalcy. The kids ran around, oblivious to the tension that had settled like dust in the apartment. Every glance I cast at Ethan felt like a test. Every small gesture weighed and measured. I laughed at the children's jokes, commented on their homework, moved through the motions. Inside, my chest tightened with every passing minute. After the kids went to bed, Ethan came into the living room, sitting across from me on the couch. He didn't speak at first, just looked at me, calm and deliberate. I tried to meet his gaze, forced a smile, told myself I could charm my way out of this. "It was just a joke," I said softly. "You're overreacting." His eyes didn't waver. "Is it really a joke if it destroys trust?" he asked quietly. I laughed nervously, trying to convince myself that tone didn't matter, that it was still playful. But the intensity in his eyes made my own laughter falter. I tried to rationalize it to myself, whispering that he was too sensitive, that I had only been testing boundaries, that I wasn't actually serious. But the silence pressed in, unbroken, and I realized that he wasn't ignoring me. He was assessing, observing, calculating. I felt the shift in the room, the change in power, and the vulnerability I had never faced before. The next day, I noticed he had altered his routine. He left earlier, returned later, and spent more time in his office. I tried to send playful texts, innocuous messages, anything to reclaim attention or redirect his thoughts. He didn't respond. I felt the first real sting of panic. The man I had thought I could manipulate, charm, and tease had removed himself from my reach. By evening, when he finally emerged, he moved through the apartment with calm precision. He asked simple questions, polite but minimal. Every word, every gesture felt measured. I realized then that the night I had thought harmless, the joke I had whispered, had started a slow, unyielding withdrawal. He wasn't angry. He was preparing. And I had no idea how far he had already gone to respond, how completely he would reclaim control without a single raised voice or confrontation. By midweek, the tension in the apartment had grown almost unbearable. Ethan's quiet presence was everywhere, deliberate and controlled, and it made every action I took feel scrutinized. He didn't yell, he didn't accuse. He simply moved with an awareness that made me hyper-conscious of myself. The whispered comment I had thought playful now hovered over every conversation, every glance, every step I took. I tried to laugh it off when I spoke to Clara, claiming he was overreacting, but deep down I knew it wasn't overreaction. It was observation. That Friday, Clara convinced me to attend a small dinner at a friend's house. I hesitated, nervous about leaving the apartment, about facing the world while carrying the weight of my mistake. But the idea of spending another evening alone with Ethan's quiet judgment was suffocating. I put on the dress I had saved for special occasions, the one that made me feel bold and irresistible. I told myself it was confidence, a way to reclaim some sense of control. At the dinner, friends greeted me warmly. Someone asked if Ethan had given me permission to go, and I laughed, saying he trusted me completely. I smiled, enjoyed the attention, and tried to feel clever, manipulative in a subtle way. Clara leaned close and whispered, warning me that Ethan's quiet demeanor might not be ignorance. I nodded, forcing myself to laugh, trying to appear light and carefree, but every word felt like it might be a misstep, another miscalculation that could unravel everything. During the evening, the conversation inevitably drifted toward relationships. I couldn't resist. I made a joke about Ethan, playful and teasing, claiming he had no sense of adventure, that he couldn't keep up with me or anyone else. The friends laughed. I laughed too, relishing the attention, the sense that I was still charming, still in control. My parents laughed along, nodding encouragement, while I could see Ethan's mother in the corner, watching quietly, disapproving. Her silence felt like an accusation. I thought I could maintain the upper hand, but the tension was already shifting. One of the friends mentioned Oliver in passing, joking about him being the life of the party. I felt the impulse to respond, to tease again, and I whispered something similar to what I had said at home. He could probably handle me better than Ethan. The laughter that followed was hollow in my ears. I caught the briefest glance toward the door, half expecting Ethan to storm in, and for a moment, my heart skipped. After dinner, I left with Clara to get some air. She kept warning me softly, "You're pushing it too far. Don't let your words come back to bite you." I waved her concerns away, insisting I knew what I was doing. But in the back of my mind, I felt the tightening knot of fear. The joke, the whisper, the attention. It was no longer harmless. I could feel the consequence coiling, waiting. Returning home, the apartment was quiet. The kind of quiet that felt deliberate, like it had been arranged to make you notice every step, every sound. Ethan was in the kitchen, preparing coffee, a subtle, almost imperceptible smile on his face. I tried to act casual, chatted about the evening, about friends, about nothing of importance. He listened, nodded, but his expression was unreadable. I tried to charm him, to redirect his attention, to laugh off my missteps, but his calm precision made me feel powerless. Later that night, after the kids were asleep, he called me into the living room. I felt the familiar tightening in my chest, a warning I couldn't ignore. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't accuse. He simply sat across from me, placed a folder on the coffee table and said softly, "We need to go through some things." My heart raced. I tried to dismiss it, telling myself it was routine paperwork, something mundane, but the folder was too thick, too deliberate, and his eyes held a quiet gravity I had never seen. As I opened it, I saw what I had feared and avoided: records, messages, documentation of the teasing, the whispers, the jokes. Every word, every moment I had thought playful, every justification I had whispered to myself. It was all there, catalogued and undeniable. My stomach dropped. I wanted to deny it, to charm my way out, to rationalize, but I realized I had no control. The man I had thought patient and gentle had become precise, methodical, and untouchable. The night I had thought was mine had already begun to control me, and I had no idea how far he had gone to prepare for the reckoning. By the start of the next week, the apartment felt smaller, heavier, every corner carrying the weight of my own recklessness. Ethan's presence was calm, deliberate, and unnervingly precise. He moved through the rooms quietly, checking the mail, making the kids breakfast, straightening small details I hadn't noticed before. I tried to act normal, folding laundry, replying to emails, tidying the living room, but every movement felt exposed, every glance scrutinized. The whispered comment I had thought playful hovered over the house like a storm cloud, and I couldn't shake the feeling that he had already begun calculating his response. Clara called mid-morning, sensing my unease. She warned me again that Ethan might be documenting everything, observing silently. I laughed nervously, saying I was fine, that he was just quiet because of work. But her words didn't comfort me. I realized that my attempts to manipulate or charm were no longer enough. The power I thought I held was slipping, and I couldn't see the bottom of it. When I got home that evening, Ethan was in the kitchen, carefully preparing dinner while the kids played in the living room. He didn't acknowledge my arrival immediately. I tried to break the tension, asking about his day, pretending my own unease didn't exist. He nodded once without looking up and continued with his tasks. I tried to laugh at a small joke, attempting to lighten the atmosphere, but his silence swallowed it, leaving me exposed. Then, casually, he said, "We need to go through some documents." My pulse jumped. I asked which documents, trying to keep my tone light. He didn't answer immediately, only pointing to a neat stack of folders on the counter. I forced a smile, telling myself it was just routine, just bills or work papers. But the folder labeled Interactions and Observations made my stomach drop. I felt the first true wave of panic. As I opened it, my worst fears materialized. Inside were printed messages, documentation of my whispered comment, the teasing I thought harmless, and even notes from my parents' reactions at various moments. Every justification I had whispered to myself, every excuse about humor or playfulness, was catalogued in clear, undeniable detail. My hands trembled as I flipped through the pages, trying to convince myself it wasn't real, that I could charm my way out if I explained. He watched me quietly, his calmness more intimidating than anger ever could be. "You've been careless," he said softly. I tried to interrupt, tried to say it was just a joke, but he shook his head slightly, still silent, still in control. His restraint made the weight of my actions feel heavier. Every manipulation I had ever relied on was useless against the methodical calm he carried. That night, after the kids went to bed, I sat on the couch, staring at the stack of documents. I tried to rationalize, telling myself it was possible to fix, that he might forgive, that charm and explanation could work. But the precision of his actions, the careful way he had collected everything, made me realize I had underestimated him. The whispered comment, the playful jest, the reckless words, they had all been preserved, and I had no defense against them. The following day, his routine remained unchanged. He left for work early, returned late, and spent more time in his office, methodically reviewing details, preparing. I sent playful messages, attempted to flirt, tried to reclaim control over the situation, but they went unanswered. The calm, deliberate withdrawal stung far more than any confrontation would have. Even the kids seemed to sense the difference, the shift in the energy of the apartment. They asked fewer questions, spoke more quietly, and I felt the hollow echo of what I had broken. My parents tried to reassure me, but even their words sounded cautious, as if they too felt the weight of Ethan's quiet authority. By the end of the week, I realized the night I had thought was harmless had begun to control everything. My whispered comment, my joke, my playful teasing, all of it had been documented, assessed, and catalogued. Ethan's calm, precise, deliberate actions had started a chain of consequences I couldn't stop. I was powerless, and the reckoning I had ignored was already unfolding around me, quiet but unstoppable. It happened one evening when the kids were at their grandparents' house and the apartment was quiet. Ethan entered carrying a manila envelope, placing it on the kitchen table with deliberate care. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't accuse. He simply said, "We need to review this." My stomach dropped, but I tried to appear casual. "What is it?" I asked, forcing curiosity rather than fear. He opened the envelope carefully and laid out its contents. Printed messages from the night of my careless whisper, documentation of texts and emails I had sent to friends, even notes about reactions from our parents and his observations of my behavior. Each word, each message, each note of my so-called playful teasing stared back at me, undeniable and precise. I felt my hands tremble, my chest tighten, and tried to argue, tried to convince myself I could charm or rationalize my way out, but the calm in his eyes stopped me. "I'm not here to yell," he said quietly. "I just need you to see the full scope." I tried to laugh, claimed it was all just a misunderstanding, that I hadn't meant anything by it. But he didn't respond to my excuses. He simply pointed to the printed records, the timestamps, the consistency of documentation. Every small moment I had thought playful, every excuse I had whispered to myself about humor and freedom, was catalogued. My stomach dropped further. Then he handed me another envelope. My pulse spiked. Inside were documents drafted by his lawyer, custody arrangements for the kids, reassignment of joint accounts, and legal measures to protect the assets we shared. "I've already taken steps to protect what matters," he said softly. I want this done fairly, legally, without drama, but I can't ignore what's happened. My hands went cold. I wanted to deny, to charm, to beg him to stop, but I realized I had no control. He had anticipated everything. I tried one last manipulation, claiming it was just a joke, that I hadn't intended harm, that my comment had been innocent. He didn't flinch. "You've had plenty of time to manipulate the narrative," he said. "Facts speak louder than excuses now." His voice was quiet, measured, and more cutting than any anger could have been. He went on to explain the custody arrangements, the division of assets, and the protective measures he had implemented. "This isn't punishment," he said, "it's consequence, and it's what follows from your choices." I wanted to cry, to plead, to make him see I could fix this, but he remained calm, deliberate, untouchable. I looked down at the evidence, my own words staring back at me, and felt powerless. Even my parents, who had once defended me, could no longer argue against the clear documentation. The man I had underestimated had acted without drama, without confrontation, quietly, legally, and completely. My attempts to charm, justify, or gaslight were meaningless. Finally, he stood and said, "I'm done explaining. Everything you need to know is in these folders. The rest will be handled through proper channels." He left the room without another word, leaving me alone with the stacks of evidence and the full weight of my betrayal. For the first time, I understood that consequences don't require anger or confrontation to be devastating. Ethan's silence, his methodical action, and his reliance on lawful authority had undone everything I had taken for granted. The night I had thought playful, the careless whisper I had dismissed, had triggered a chain of events I could neither charm, lie, nor manipulate my way out of. The reckoning had arrived, and I was powerless to stop it. 2 weeks later, the full weight of Ethan's response settled over me like a storm I had invited in. The envelopes, the folders, the meticulous legal documentation, everything he had quietly prepared, had gone into effect. Custody arrangements were finalized. The kids would spend most of their time with him. Assets were reassigned, bank accounts, the apartment lease, even the small savings I had hoped to keep were now under his control. I sat in the apartment alone, staring at the papers as if they might magically erase themselves or absolve me if I just looked long enough. The kids adjusted quickly. Their routine with Ethan remained calm, predictable, and orderly. I watched from a distance as he helped them with homework, patiently answered questions, and laughed quietly at something Evan said. Mira and I kept thinking of the children by their real names, sensed nothing of the tension that had grown in the last weeks. Their joy was visible, untouched by the chaos I had caused, and yet, every smile I saw, every small moment of contentment they experienced with him, felt like a personal judgment, a reminder that I had destroyed trust I could never reclaim. I tried to call Clara, needing some anchor to reality, someone to remind me that I was still capable of influence, of charm. She asked how things were going, and I lied easily, told her everything was fine, that Ethan was just being distant after the argument. But her voice carried caution now, hesitation that I hadn't noticed before. Even Clara, my friend, the one person I had relied on for encouragement and reassurance, seemed to see the severity of the situation I had created. Ethan's parents remained quietly supportive of him. I could feel their distance, the subtle judgment in every glance, the polite avoidance in their conversations with me. My own parents tried to mediate, pleading with him to reconsider, trying to remind him of my playfulness and the innocence of a joke. But even their voices sounded weaker than usual, their words hollow. The calm authority he had always carried in private had now extended to everyone around us. Clara attempted to distract me, inviting me to a small birthday gathering, but it felt hollow. Friends laughed and smiled, but I could see the underlying awareness, the whispers, the sideways glances that reminded me of how exposed I had become. I forced laughter, told myself it was temporary, that I could still maintain control, that I could spin this, manipulate the story, charm my way out. But the reality was unavoidable. Ethan's preparation, his precision, had left me powerless. Around 8 that evening, a courier arrived at my door. He handed me a single envelope, and I signed for it mechanically, not daring to hope, not daring to fear what it might contain. Inside were the final documents confirming custody, asset protection, and separation arrangements. The pages were crisp, official, and undeniable. On top was a short note, written in Ethan's calm, precise handwriting. You wanted to push boundaries. I've ensured the consequences are lasting. My hands trembled as I read it. I realized then that the man I had underestimated had dismantled everything I had relied on, without anger, without yelling, without drama. I left the apartment in a daze, clutching the envelope, unable to process the scope of what had occurred. The city outside blurred as I drove, the streetlights smearing across the windshield. By instinct, I passed Ethan's house, the porch light glowing faintly. Inside, I saw him with the kids, calm, patient, unflappable. He was helping Evan with a drawing, Mira laughing at something only a child could find funny. The laughter, the lightness, the joy, was untouched by my reckless words. That laughter, once a shared sound between us, now belonged to him alone. I wanted to knock on the door, to beg, to apologize, to explain, but the weight of the envelopes, the folders, the meticulous documentation, and the precision of his planning kept me rooted to the curb. I realized I had no words, no leverage, no defenses left. Every manipulation, every excuse, every attempt to charm or spin the situation was meaningless. Ethan had acted quietly, methodically, legally, and completely. Returning home, the apartment felt impossibly small. Every object, the mugs he used, the chairs arranged precisely, the photos on the wall, reminded me of the life I had jeopardized. I sat at the kitchen table, rereading the note. You wanted to push boundaries. I've ensured the consequences are lasting. It wasn't a threat. It was closure. A calculated, quiet, unyielding closure that left no space for bargaining, for charm, for lies. My selfishness, my teasing, my careless words had all been catalogued, assessed, and addressed with precision I could not overcome. My phone buzzed repeatedly with messages from friends and family. I didn't answer. I couldn't. The house was silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the clock, and the memories of everything I had said, everything I had done, everything I had laughed at as harmless. Ethan had dismantled my control without confrontation, without drama, leaving me powerless to affect the outcome. I understood at last that consequences don't require anger, shouting, or spectacle to be devastating. Silence, patience, and lawfulness can be sharper than any raised voice. Ethan had exercised them all with absolute precision. The life I had once believed I could manipulate, charm, and control was gone. The night I had thought playful, the words I had whispered carelessly, had triggered a series of events I could not stop. And now, with the documents in my hand and the apartment empty around me, I had no choice but to face the full, irrevocable consequences of my actions, alone, powerless, and humiliated. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next story. Write in the comments from which city you are watching.